Thank you for having me. So, right off the bat, I just want to tell a very different sort of story than so many I've seen. I didn't make it, just for people with disabilities. I wanted to help everyone understand this better because a lot of people they don't get us. One of those sorts of stories that's most common and that really bugs me are we'll have some character who's a screw up at just about everything in life. They can barely do anything, can barely even get out of bed because some people think that's all it is. That is like a requirement. But then they'll have this one neat trick, this one special gift, some talent that essentially redeems them. It's like, oh, they weren't really worth anything before, but now they have this special trait, like they can count faster than a computer or something like that. Now we care about them because they proved themselves. And this is going to be kind of a silly example to use, but it's one that I found is kind of reliable. The ugly duckling, any story in that vein. If he doesn't become a beautiful swan at the end, does that mean the other ducklings were right to pick on him? That they were correct? Of course not. And just like that, we shouldn't have to justify our own existence with that one neat party trick to impress people. But we're so saturated with that kind of story, it's almost like they just can't think of anything more interesting to write about us. Because oftentimes these are stories read by people who aren't autistic or don't even know anybody who is. So they're just kind of commenting on it from their own inevitably biased perspective. It's just like their commentary on us. And I wanted to show what it's actually like to be us, but to do it in a relatable enough way. The character Minnow, she goes through the same struggles that many other people do. She has PTSD, mood swings, depression, survivor's guilt. All those things weigh her down. It's just she has this extra layer of baggage that comes on top of that, in the form of autism and all the extra struggles that come with that. They make it even more difficult to work through those already very difficult personal issues. But even then, there are some things unique to her, just little behaviors that will manifest here and there. I don't ever have anybody in the story outright call out what her condition is by name. Like they might not even have that name for it anymore. They might call it something completely different. But you just see it here and there in the way she acts or the way she speaks or how she might be overstimulated by certain lights or sounds or might not understand certain social gestures. Like I have a scene in the first book where somebody pats her on the shoulder to congratulate her, but up until that point, people have almost always only done it to scold her, for not paying attention or not being fast enough. And she's like, wait, now it's supposed to be a positive thing? I wish people would make up their minds. So it's just little things like that here and there. But she feels, many of the same things that are just basic human things that so many people don't realize we feel. It's a common stereotype that us autistic people don't empathize with others or don't have basic emotions. And you might on occasion find a case like that, but I found that for many, if not most of us, it's more so just that we're so overloaded by the world around us that we almost can't handle how much we feel for others. Like it gets to be too much sometimes. And I just wanted to show those sorts of struggles in this. One of the other things I wanted to do to set this series apart from so many other stories is the character's age. So we focus so much on autism in young children, because so many people, they want to fix their child as if there's any such things. And that's just not the reality for so many of us. It never goes away. You have to live with it and adjust to it your entire life, which is much harder for some than others because it's different for everybody. But you're the only person you're going to spend your entire life with, so you're going to have to learn to live with yourself sooner or later. And just try to improve yourself in whatever little ways you can here or there, because it will make life more bearable in the long run. But I start the story when Minnow's already 25. Now we do get many scenes that reference her childhood, little flashbacks that show what it was like for her. But I wanted to mainly focus on what it's like to have to continue to live with this day in, day out, year after year. Because when we focus mostly on autistic youth, it creates this weird impression that something happens to us, as if we go away when we hit 18, we don't exist anymore. And again, that's not how it is. It is a lifelong struggle that you have to, again, just learn to cope with and try to thrive in whatever ways you can. So I just want to tell a very different sort of story with this, about normal-ish enough person who is just trying to make it through the day and find meaning and purpose in life like anyone else, and hopefully people won't make that too difficult for her. And before I go any further, does anyone have any questions right off the bat? Okay, I'm going to play a little something that I put together a while ago. It's a trailer for the first couple of books. I made one a little more recently, and here's this one for now.
Captain! We gotta dive before the storm gets worse!
Not yet. I hear something. I've heard of these. I believe they were called giraffes.
What? There's no way animals like this were around.
There were lots of strange animals like this once upon a time.
What are we supposed to call her? She let the former captain die for some stupid doll.
Andrea, I'm sorry.
Don't feel bad. You be good. Alright?
Andrea! I know it's unsightly, a girl with 4 stumps. I've got something different in my head. My brain, it doesn't work like other people's brains do. I've probably always been this way.
Look, no one on the ship really hates you. They all had this pipe dream that Andrea would come to her senses and be captain again.
Am I supposed to pity you? This is your fault, just like everything else.
The term super piranha carries a fairly obvious implication that these descended from very different freshwater piranhas in small bodies of water on land.
My mother says there never was any such thing as land.
Of course there used to be more land. We came from it just like you did. I mean, we can't really live in water either.
I'd like you to meet a friend of mine in the Navy, Lenora Hayes, commander of the British.
I've heard about your run-in with pirates. Not just any, but the Barracuda gang, no less.
These pirates are only men with penguins and cutlasses. They live like sea monsters, ready to ambush ships like yours, and give up their flesh.
I'll keep this simple. Some very wealthy people have hired us to reserve the new land for them. If you do anything to soil this place, the second I see you piddle yourselves like frightened puppies, I will bury you in that exact spot and mark it with the next for future generations to find.
We need something bigger than this to combat pirate scum. Stronger machines with stronger pilots. They don't bother with things like tranquilizer darts or capture goop. These are toys.
Like mine and everyone else's here, your life belongs to Barracuda, the pirate queen. Your heart beats only for her now, and the sooner that sinks in, the sweeter your lives are gonna be.
She was suffocating here, and we let that happen. She began drowning the same moment Andrea did. It just took longer.
I don't think Minnow has any business being on this ship. Taking advantage of people like her, it's beneath you.
Lenora swore you wouldn't be involved in real fights.
Good for her. I never promised any such thing.
We sort of have our own language. Everything we say means something slightly different to us than it does to other people. That doesn't mean everything we say is wrong.
I think Minnow should be allowed to do in life as she chooses. She's an adult.
You're not stupid, Minnow. You can think your way out of anything. I'm always disconnected there. It feels like I'm watching some other person's arms and legs do what my brain tells them to. Don't bother with me. Sooner or later something bad will happen to you. I hate this stupid body. And my brain that doesn't work.
You are not a burden. You are not a problem. You are not useless or a waste of space, or whatever else people may say. You are a person.
We caught her adrift one night. No idea where she's from.
You really don't know anything about her?
I don't think even she knows. She's nobody.
I hear the way people talk about me. They'd say, she shouldn't have to make a decision like that on her own. Someone like her, she could so easily be taken advantage of. And I am so sick of being spoken of like I'm 5 years old.
I don't think there's anything Andrea didn't want you to be able to try if it was your decision.
Don't get sucked down. love you.
I don't have any special gifts. I'm just me.
So that's the first trailer, and the stars kind of aligned to make this happen. I put out the call a couple of years ago because I wanted to put a little something together. And I know that the idea of a trailer for books might sound kind of funny to people, because with a text-based novel, you wouldn't be able to show much of anything. Like maybe the cover and a couple of and a few lines, from the text, from within the pages. But with comics, being a visual medium, seems like the perfect chance to try to make it feel kind of like a cartoon and have voice acting and everything. And as soon as I put the word out and I asked if anyone would be willing to do this, people just came to my aid because they appreciated what it was about, the causes that I'm pushing for, and they wanted to help make it happen. Like Andy Winslow and Dalila Ali Rashad, they're both real actors, and they just want help just because. Like I was wondering how am I even going to convince them when one of them was suggested to me by a friend of hers, and I didn't even have time to. She came right to me, it's like, sign me up. And I even was able to make a second trailer fairly recently, but this first one was almost 2 years ago. But I just released another one, and I was able to thankfully get many of the same voice actors, and everyone just came back. Like they really sympathized and could see how passionate I was about this. They too are passionate about these causes of trying to spread understanding of not just autistic people, but various people with disabilities. And I do tackle many different subjects throughout these books. It's mainly a story about how people treat each other, not scapegoating the most vulnerable members of society as some burden, as if we just did something about them, all of society would be fixed. No. And I'm just trying to push a message of not just awareness of these issues, but actual understanding. Too many people, they stop short of that first step. Like they'll spread awareness of all the things that are scary about something like autism, but then what's next? That could end up just maligning us further. So I wanted to spread actual understanding of autistic individuals and compassion. Just hoping that people will just treat each other a little better, using this as kind of a lens for that. Something I want to say, you may have noticed a few other plot details. One, Minnow was born a peculiar way. She's not a robot, but she needs prosthetics just to get around, because she wasn't born with arms or legs. And I mainly threw that in because I thought it would make a nice visual metaphor for what it's like in here. And yes, I thought someone was raising their hand. Well, I wanted to make a visual metaphor for what it's already like being in her head. Because if she touches something like a hot stove, she might not even notice. She doesn't even have phantom limb because there wasn't something there. She doesn't have that experience of having lost that. And that's how it can sincerely feel to be autistic sometimes, to try to reach out and make new connections with people. It's more than just awkward. You can feel blind at times. Like you're just feeling your way around in the dark. You don't know when you're going to bump into something or how it's going to be. It's like you're just barely out of reach of everyone around you. But you got to keep trying to make that connection. So the basic gist of the plot of the world is it takes place a long, long time from now. And the world has been flooded for much of that time to the point where many people don't even believe there ever was land. They think it's a fairy tale. But new land does start appearing. New islands start popping up left and right, what would have been mountaintops in our time. And so now there's a power struggle over who gets the new lots. And the elites of the world, they hire a gang of pirates to reserve it for them, to keep anyone else from coming near. And one thing leads to another, and through a few chance encounters, Minnow ends up roped into that mess. One of the other reasons I gave her the limbs was, how do I say this? I wanted to, I'm sorry, I forgot the next thing I wanted to say. Oh yes, it's really to show how she changes throughout the series. almost like it's a reflection of how she feels inside. Her quality of life is entirely dependent on what parts are available to her at any given time, what she can afford. So when we see her at the start of the story, she's in a pretty bad way. Like she has, let me find a good piece right here. Like here you see she has hand-me-downs, they don't even really match her. They were each made for a different person, not even the right size. So that's how she starts at the beginning, when we see her destitute. But little by little, throughout the story, she gets new opportunities and she's able to acquire better limbs for herself that drastically improve her quality of life. Okay, you see these ones are already a little nicer. And she's able to make new connections with people as she becomes more confident and is able to just go out there in ways that she literally could not before. So, before I go on, does anyone have any questions? Alright, I guess I'll keep going. So I first conceptualized Minnow back in either very, very late 2013 or very early 2014. It was right around New Year's. I was at a birthday thing for a friend. I got a little bored after a while and I happened to have some paper with me, so I suddenly had this idea and I had to draw it out, so I scribbled it down. I'll see if I can find it in this. And that was where it started. I don't know if it'll be difficult to see, but that first sketch, so the one that's black and white, that is my first ever drawing of her. It's just a completely spur of the moment thing. And then here she is a couple years later as I was really getting a feel for what style I wanted to go for. And I released the first 2 books early in 2017, which, funny story, were originally going to be one huge 300-page book, but that would have cost too much per copy. It would just scare people away with the price tag. But thankfully, I was able to find a nice place to cut through the middle, and I added a couple extra scenes to the first one, just so it ends on kind of a nice note, segueing into the next one. But yes, I released the first 2 within a very short time frame in that year, and then I released Volume 3 the next year, Volume 4 this year, and I plan to release a new book every year until I've another dozen or so volumes. Because I have big plans for this story. I want to show every portion of Minnow's life. Like the first one, she's destitute. The next one, she manages to make it out there and go on some adventures. And the third one, you see her experiences start to wear down on her. Like it turns out to be a little more than she thought she could handle. And she doesn't see it coming at first, but by the end of the volume, she's in a very different state than she was at the start. But she's able to bounce back from it, and she kind of finds her groove in Volume 4. Although there will be more ups and downs as it goes on, and new things come her way. The funny thing is, you can kind of see in Volume 3 what it was like for me making it, because weirdly enough, the third book was harder to put together than the first 2 put together. I don't know what it was about. I guess there was just so much happening in it, so many issues that I wanted to tackle, that by the end of it, I was really strained. I found myself, more easily getting flustered, seeming to regress in some little ways here and there around that time, until I finally was able to take a break as this was released. And you can again see that in Minnow, as she ends up, kind of in a bad place by the end of it. But when I got to Volume 4, it's like I really solidified what I wanted to do with this series. And now I've found a nice rhythm where I'm more confident than before, and I'm sure that I can churn these out at a decent enough pace and make each one feel like everything I want it to be. And this next thing I'm going to mention, I don't know how many people here can relate to this, but at numerous points throughout my childhood and teen years, and even to this day, now and then, I would enter a state for a few weeks to maybe a little over a month or so, where I would seem to regress, or certain symptoms that I had managed to get over would start flaring up again for a little while. As if my brain was winding up to make this next big leap, and it was just too much for it to do everything at once. So for a time, it seemed like I was taking a step back, but eventually I'd come out of it, I'd be taking 2 steps forward, and every now and then I go through another step like that. And I end up feeling like a different person by the end of it. And I imagine at least a few people in this room have gone through that exact same thing. Like, eventually, like, you might not notice the first few times, especially when you're younger, but eventually there comes a point where you can sort of feel it coming on, like, oh, everything's a little different. I think it might be happening again. And by that point, you just kind of have to tough it out and try to come out on the other side. It almost becomes like dull with how routine it gets, but at least you have something to look forward to if you do manage to come out of that. So does anyone have any questions so far? Yes?
When you were talking about Minnow and thinking back when I first came into the family, I'm thinking, you're Minnow, because you've grown and you've got so much confidence, and I see you proud of your work, and you have grown so much. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next.
I just wanted to say I love everything that you've spoken about, all the different steps that you've taken. One thing though I want to mention, I would love for you to write something just about your whole experience, for you, because I love hearing all the stories that you've talked about today.
Well, that's the thing, this was largely, for me, I guess you could say, because I have like built up this whole world around Minnow, but much of what Minnow thinks about the world and what she feels, that is like the core of it for me. It's kind of difficult to articulate, but I have noticed now and then I'll get a comment from someone who like sees the trailer and goes like, Minnow reminds me a lot of you, and the way she talks and the way she thinks. And like, well, these are fairly common experiences. I don't really like referring to it as a spectrum because that implies that people towards one end of the spectrum are somehow worse than people towards the other end. Right. But there is something of a gradient in that it is different for everybody. I view conditions like autism and some others as just a different distribution of brain power, where instead of having it perfectly evenly spread over all areas, you'll have some bunched up in key areas. And so we might be really good at some things, but not so great at other things. And again, it's not often the one neat trick, which has unfortunately become a pretty big stereotype, to the point where you might go to a party and someone might find out like, oh, your kid's autistic, what's his talent? What's his special gift? It's like, well, I don't know, he's really good at giving hugs, does that count? That's something that I've heard from a few parents, where they were grateful that, this takes some more nuance to look at it. I don't know what the mouse was doing there. I try to show various mental states of Minnows. I try to make the environment reflector. You may have noticed that each piece might have this one really strong color that, kind of overpowers all the others, and because that again is what it can feel like at times. I wanted to make it look like the world around Minnow was changing as she changes. This is her with her pet. He's a seal, because people have taken to adopting them kind of like land dogs. We just call them sea dogs. I based many of his expressions on my own dog, a beagle that I had a few years ago. She's passed of old age, but Puppy, as he's named, he makes many of the same gestures and expressions. Like she might be calling for him to come to her, and he'll be like looking out of the corner of his eye, but his nose will be pointing a different way, like, I don't know. So something many people have seen in their own dogs. Now this arm isn't actually for her to use. No, this one is too big. It's just you see her going through the tests where they're seeing if she can manipulate this. She helps out with various projects for the Navy of that world, which is basically the only sort of law enforcement that they have, because with no land, everyone lives in ships. And again, there is new land popping up, but some people want out for themselves, and so they have them to decide like who gets how much, or how long people might have to wait for to return to their true home. this is something that I haven't quite delved into yet. I'm planning to do so in the next book and the next one after that. But mankind was kind of on its way out for a while. And it was really like the land returning that basically saved people. And so Minnow was passionate about trying to make sure that there's enough land for everyone. It's why she fights against the people trying to deprive everyone of their true home, like where mankind really belongs. This right here is a merfolk. I have several different types of them. This is one of the least fish-like. They're called Dolphin Merfolk because they have the most traits in common with us. They have freckles, they have eyelashes. Their lungs work better than their gills do. And the whole idea is that they were always there right alongside us. They just didn't reveal themselves until the flood happened. Because they can't stay in the water all the time either. They would get tired and drown, as can happen with real dolphins. Sometimes a dolphin will be so tired that they can't reach the surface, so another one will push them up. So our first interactions with these creatures was really when they would have to come to the decks of ships and say, hey, can we rest here for a while? We're pretty tired. And then it became this partnership of sorts, where they would, it's kind of like Morse code. They could send messages to each other all around the world to warn civilian ships to steer clear of where any pirate ships might be lurking to ambush them. And something see, he's confused. Like, this is his first time meeting humans. I have another piece that's kind of similar to this. If I can just load it down here. This is one of my favorite pieces. She's holding a toddler, and he's confused that her nose is in the middle of her face instead of up here where it's supposed to be. So he's just trying to figure us out. He doesn't know any better. This is his first time ever meeting us. Oh, I realized there was one person that had a question before, and I forgot about them.
That's me.
Yes.
I wanted to go back to the beginning when you first conceptualized Minnow and did that drawing. At that time, had you been thinking about doing a book, or?
Yes.
Oh, you had. So
throughout my teen years, I drew like constantly, so many things. Like ever since I could pick up a pencil when I was a toddler, I started just sketching whatever I could think of. And before too long, I learned how to draw faces from things like Thomas. This was when they used models on camera before they switched over animation. And there was just something about those static, kind of exaggerated faces where I could look at them for a while and they helped me understand basic facial expressions. And then I started drawing those, and eventually, I understood what I was drawing more than what I see. And then I started drawing more humanoid characters. For the longest time, until my early teens, I didn't think I could draw actual people. I was like, no, I can't do it. I can only draw robots or just various creatures. And then I tried it, and of course they didn't look that great at first, but I just kept at it for years. And now here we are with this. Also, the various subject matter that I tackled. I experimented with so many little stories, oftentimes just putting my own spin on something, or taking a story that I thought could use a few improvements, little things about it that bugged me, and I would create an alternate take on it, just as a hobby, just for the fun of it. It was all practice for this, just to see if I could tackle various subject matter and do it in a poignant enough way. And thanks to things like the internet, I did get a consistent, steady stream of feedback. And it helped me gain a sense of how people talk about basic conversation. Because I can look back several years and see what I was making at the time, what I was writing at the time. And I think, that doesn't sound anything like how I talk now. It doesn't sound like how people talk. But again, it became this back and forth thing where eventually I came to understand. And I just know that if I wasn't able to draw and get a sense for reading people's faces, and if I didn't get to write as an outlet, I wouldn't understand just how people communicate. Basically, without this, I know that my autism would be much more obvious, where I might not have progressed nearly as much as I have, thanks to having an outlet like this. And I have my mother to thank for being so supportive over all those years. So many parents I know so many parents would have probably brushed it off as silly, like, oh no, you should strive for a different career, something more practical. But you'll get one every now and then who will see something great in it and push you to pursue that. So again, I heard a thing for believing in me, for not brushing this off like I know more than a few families would have. So again, I've been drawing since I was very young. I think it was just sometime in my teens that I first started coloring things. And one of the things that really hit me were sunsets, just at the sky. Because I go for walks every day that I can, which is a little hard in the winter season. But it tends to be towards the end of the day. Because I get so wrapped up in all my work, all my different projects, that I might almost forget to go out, and then I'll see that the sun's already going down. But there's just something about those gradients, those smooth, steady transitions between colors that really inspires me. Something you see a lot in cartoons are these stark, either flat or 2 or 3 tone shades. And I like that well enough, but I wanted to just, again, go for a different feel, and that's why you do see all these soft blues, because I'm trying to, again, capture how it feels at times. Even with this, where we don't actually see the surface that much, where I try to focus on the beauty of the ocean, I wanted to always have like one consistent light source, just like one fixed point. Like something they tell you not to do in the comics industry is to not use gradient backgrounds if you can. To not just draw a character with like a color behind them, to have all this detail, all these objects in the background. But readers need a break from now and then. You don't want to overload their brain with too much information. I've seen some artists who will cram in as many details as they can to every little frame that you end up looking at the pages like, oh, what am I supposed to look at first? This is too much information. Sometimes it's nice to give people a bit of a cool down. Or, again, you can use color to show how a character is feeling inside. Because when you're really riled up, you're not focusing on every little thing around you or what object might be out of place. And if you look back at a memory, you're not going to remember it perfectly. Like, imagine a few years from now you're thinking about this room. You're not going to remember how many seats there were. You might not even remember what any of these pieces on the walls look like. So, that's not to say that I don't have any backgrounds with details of sorts. Here's one that I'm pretty happy with. This is actually a piece from Volume 5, where due to some buildings having pushed above the sea level, you can still see coral on them that hasn't even completely dried out yet. And that's just the state that the world is in. I love drawing with the insides of submarines and so on. It changes from book to book, but the first book especially is quite dark. I don't mean in terms of not just the story, but visually. There's a lot of dim lighting because I wanted to make it feel as if you're literally trapped in the claustrophobic bowels of a submarine or at the bottom of the ocean. It's a good long while before we even see the sky. Like 40 pages into the book, Minnow steps out onto the deck of her resident ship, and it's almost too bright, blindingly so, and just to that, because he hasn't been up there for a few weeks. But as her situation improves, that things do get a little brighter, though there are always some of those moments where you see just how hopeless things can feel from time to time. Yes?
Actually, I want to comment on something. Your shading, I've noticed a lot, and it's what pops out to me the most about the artwork.
Thank you.
And at times, especially like in the underwater scenes and stuff, the acting lighting is a lot different than what I've seen in other works, and I actually enjoy a lot more than books stating like Aquaman, where it's almost all one shade, the way they do it, but you have like varying lights and stuff. I was just kind of wondering like where you kind of got the reference to actually get that so beautiful.
Well, again, I just got it from going out for walks and looking at the sky. Because at the end of every day, there's just a few minutes, just before the sun goes down, where you'll see these explosions of crazy colors that only last for a little bit. And you might have 10 seconds to pull out your camera and get a really nice shot before the sky changes again and the moment's gone. You just kind of have to try to remember it. But that's where I draw much of that inspiration from, that's just how the world looks to me. It also helps that we're very close to the ocean, so I do get to look at least the surface of it a lot. And my mom, she paints the ocean, and she interprets it in a pretty powerful way. Like you'll have points where it looks calm, but it might swallow you up at any moment. It looks nice, but it's almost like the fluctuating emotions in a person. What did I want to say? Oh yeah, something about one other thing about the colors before I forget. Another thing to tell you in the comic industry is to never use more than one panel that's the same color on any given page, because the entire page might blur together. I use colors to set entire scenes apart. But it's mostly bluish, kind of almost purplish here, and then we suddenly jump to inside a ship, and it's all dominated by this oppressive orange and brown, just these very rusty colors. That's to show the change in mood. Or I have a scene a little bit later where you have all these unsettling greenish colors with the occasional bit of red. It almost feels like an infection, it feels septic. And it kind of shows Minnow's deteriorating emotional state in that moment. Or here, again, you have these nice blues, even a little bit of green here and there. And then we transition to this very aggressive red, because Minnow is quite upset in that moment. And again, I'm trying to use it to show the character's state. The way I paste these, I try to make it feel kind of like a storyboard for a movie. People comment on the artwork, on the style, and they ask what my inspiration might be. One of them, and not in the way you think, is kind of manga. I don't mean it in terms of how it's drawn. I don't mean in terms of big eyes or anything like that. I mean in terms of the pacing. Because American comics, most of them tend to be very congested. Because you have to fit an entire story, or at least a significant chunk of a story, within about 20 pages. So you'll have entire fight scenes that might be summed up in a few panels, not even a full page. And you'll have loads and loads of dialogue just crammed into this small space. And you just kind of have to imagine that they're making 15 or so moves in your head that you don't actually get to see. And again, it can feel kind of congested. You just want to see what happens next. Whereas in their comics, in manga and so on, they will dedicate entire panels, even entire pages, to every solitary minute gesture, every facial expression, someone waving their hand. Or, if it's a fight scene, you'll see every bit that's choreographed. Again, it feels kind of like a storyboard for a movie. And yes, it does use up more paper. It does make these take a little bit longer to make, but it makes for a much brisker read, because you can just kind of go through it at a more brisk pace. That's not to say there aren't still some scenes that get very talky, where the characters just kind of pour their hearts out and you get to see what they think of the world. One such scene, I can just get to it. Here, they're talking about various social issues, just little things they've noticed or I have this character confiding in Minnow, telling her about a group that she used to be a part of that seemed like an activism group, but again, they were just inadvertently maligning us further by spreading bad stereotypes about us, and she just couldn't be a part of it anymore. In fact, that character makes me think of another topic, going back to disabilities. I don't want that to be the entire point of a character. I don't want them to feel like a token. So when I'm introducing a character, oftentimes I'll wait a little while before revealing what their particular ailment is. Because if you do that right away, it can make them look like a token. It's almost like, hi, this is the only reason that I'm here, there's nothing else going on in my life. And it's like, nobody is their disability, even the more mental ones. It's not our entire personality. It's not everything there is to know about us. So oftentimes I'll say introduce a character in one volume, let us get to know them for a little bit, and then we'll say in the next volume, just come up in conversation, or you'll see a character taking pills and someone goes like, oh, what's that for? And I know this doesn't count as a disability, but it is a complication for someone's quality of life. I go, oh, I was born without a thyroid, so if I don't take these pills, my body stops working. And so then I take that chance to address some of the issues that come with that. some of the annoying little things that people with that get asked a lot, like, oh, well, why don't you just get some kind of implant? You know, like a different thyroid. It's like, well, then they just have to take a different kind of medication for the rest of their lives to keep their body from rejecting that. It just makes the problem even harder. It's like either way, if they run out of medicine, it'd be pretty scary for them. But again, I don't want that to be the first thing we learn about them, because it's like when you're meeting someone for the first time, most people aren't keen to announce their particular thing. It's not like a badge of honor, and you want someone to get to know you for who you are first and appreciate you for that. And that's how I approach characters, because if we get to know them first, and then we find out they've been dealing with this other thing the whole time, that just makes them even more interesting. Yes?
Two. One is whenever you did your first drawing of Minnow in 2014, you said, I think, what was it that made you either think or decide this is the one that I'm gonna take the time to develop into a whole series?
I've been struggling with a few factors. I had some ideas, but nothing that really congealed together until just that spur of the moment. I refer to it like the stars aligning, because it really did feel like that. All these elements were just kind of out of place. Then for a second, they just perfectly fit together. I'm like, I have to draw this now before I forget it and it's gone forever. And so, yeah, it's a good thing that I did it then. I know it probably looked a little rude, like the birthday party was still going on, for a friend, but again, I just had to jot it down before Minnow might have been gone, just like that. Like I said, I tackled numerous other stories, but those were all really practice. They weren't the kind of thing that I would want to actually sell. But I was working my way up a ladder. I knew, I'm not quite ready for this. I gotta prove it to myself first. And it was right around that time that I finally felt ready to really make my own completely, as original as I can make it thing. And so I don't know, for a few months I was just thinking about what this character would look like, what she would be, and it's really hard to articulate how it happened. It was just the right impulse. One thing is, I've always enjoyed drawing mechanical things, mechanical details, and so people with prosthetics in this world are actually pretty common. It's just a nice chance for me to draw various different things. Plus, while a character's physical appearance might not change that much as my art style changes, I can still, change those parts of them. And just, I've learned quite a few things about prosthetics and how they work since I started the series. And I'm not going to take that into account in future volumes going forward, just to try to make it reflect life even more accurately. I guess another thing, I don't like tackling any specific disability or social issue if I don't know much about it, because you risk representing those groups badly and making things worse for them than before. It almost becomes preferable to not be represented than to be represented in a way that makes people who are just kind of indifferent to you suddenly come after you. And I've seen some very botched attempts at representing certain groups that ended up going the wrong way. And it's like, gosh darn it, how did they not see that coming? So again, I try to keep my hands off of certain things until I really understand them. And sometimes certain things might just work out by accident, but it could still end up working out for the best. Basically, I don't want to speak for someone else the way, again, certain people speak for those like me. I'm trying to remember something else. Before I go any further, does anyone else have any other questions? Let me go first.
So you taught yourself to draw. You didn't take any lessons because your drawings are excellent.
Well, like I said, I've had a compulsion to draw since I was very young, since some of my earliest memories. I say some of because I do remember what it was like to still be crawling around. But it was, I don't know, maybe sometime when I was 3, maybe even slightly younger, when I first started just drawing on any paper that I could. But yes, I was mostly self-taught, I guess you could say. I didn't go to any classes, but again, my mother helped me out with this. There were just little things that she would point out to me now and then, like maybe, I tended to make necks too short and thick, or I made people's wrists too thick. And it was just little things like that. Sometimes I might not even see what she was getting at first, but before long I would just kind of notice it for myself and think, wait a second. And then I look back at some older drawings and think, like, I've been drawing that way? Oh gosh, it's been wrong the whole time. So, basically, listen to your mothers. They know their stuff. But yes, I can't say that I was completely self-taught because, again, I did have someone helping me out with all that. But yes, I did not go to any special classes for art. I just developed my own style and tried to keep it at that. And yes, your question.
Is your production mostly paper and ink sorts of things, or do you bring in some digital art as well?
I draw these on paper, just with mechanical pencils mostly. I'll sketch them down, and then I'll scan them, and I'll use programs on my computer to add the colors and the dialogue. I used to write the dialogue, the lettering in with a pencil, but I found that it does just look much nicer when you use the computer to do it, to insert digital. It makes it a little cleaner, a little easier for people to read. The biggest thing is just making sure there's enough space in the panel for it. That's why I tended to struggle with that for a while. It was because I didn't realize how much space I might need. But again, those were things that I learned going through the books. When I was a teen, I used to, again, write the dialogue by hand. It would end up bunched on the top of a panel. And that just doesn't look that great. And since then, I've learned to break it up and just have like a little bubble here, leading to another bubble here, and so on, which makes it feel like, a briskly paced conversation. So, again, I'm trying to remember what I wanted to say next. Oh yeah, it's kind of crazy how different the world is for aspiring artists now. Because a couple decades ago, maybe even 1 decade ago, I would not have been able to do this the way I wanted to. This is one of the reasons that I self-published. Because the way I wanted to tell the story, the way I wanted to pace it, where the chapters are kind of irregular, some are a fair bit longer than others, and they get compiled in these big 150, 60-ish page clumps, is that I knew that most publishers would not accept this. They would try to force me to do it in a very different way that just wouldn't fit the kind of story that I wanted to tell. But again, you couldn't do that for a time. But thanks to various print-on-demand services, now you can. You just have to make sure that the images are the right size to leave a margin. You have to make sure that your text is large enough that it's easy for people to read. And you just make sure everything looks nice and clean, you format it just the right way. And it's always going to be difficult the first time. And you're going to have to order a few proofs because you'll notice little things in each one that you end up wanting to change. Like a few typos, or you may realize that something doesn't look quite as good as when you originally drew it. It always helps to have a few extra sets of eyes to look it over, because they'll even notice things that you won't. But back in the day, you couldn't just make a book and then print out a few copies for yourself as needed. You would have to order bulk, like hundreds of copies at once before even launching a project like this. It made it so much riskier. But these days, if you want to make a book, it really is, I wouldn't say it's downright easy, but it is possible now in a way that it didn't used to be. And I just look forward to seeing, all the different things that the new aspiring writers and artists are able to make that they couldn't have, back like around the time that I was still a kid. Before I go any further, does anyone else want to ask something? Yes.
Excluding the time you take for polishing the final print, how long does it take you to do a volume?
Well, it depends, because I do have some workaholic tendencies where I might bury my nose in my work and not pace myself well enough. That was kind of what happened with Volume 3, is that I would go for these long stretches where I wouldn't realize just how hard I was working and I needed to take a step back. But if I couldn't churn out like at least one volume a year, going at a decent pace, keeping things in moderation. Because that's just like a page every couple of days. And on a really good day, if I don't have that much else going on, I can churn out at least one page, maybe two, but that's if I just don't have much else happening that day. And it's important to keep these things in moderation. Yes? Oh, I'm so sorry. With Minnow, again, I just want to tell a very different story than so many that I've seen. Because it really was starting to bug me just how samey a lot of them were. How people had so little understanding of us that I guess they just didn't think that you could write an interesting story about a character who doesn't have an obvious superpower. And I want to show that no, there are plenty of other things about just a person that can be interesting, that you can latch onto. They don't need the gimmick. Now, there are certain circumstantial things, Minnow can prove useful for things but it's like nobody should want to be missing all of their limbs. Nobody would want to be in the places that she is. She's just making the best of sometimes bad circumstances. Yes?
Good question. It has to do with your little video clips, your trailers. The first one, two parts. One, can you see the movement that you would expect in a trailer when you're kind of outlining the story in your mind? Can you kind of see the movement, and did that help you select the pieces and how fast you made them move through the
Not quite as I'm doing it. When I'm just making it through these, I don't really know beforehand which scenes I'm going to want to show in the trailer. It just often works out that every couple of books I look back through it and I notice there are enough scenes that will work out for that sort of thing. And then I just try to add them together as cohesively as I can.
So with the first one and the second one, did you tackle it differently? Was there something different that you knew that you wanted to show with the second trailer you developed than the first one? How did that all...
The second one is very different. It's a little more streamlined. Because when I was happy with all the vocal performances, all the different essence that went into the first one, looking back at it now, it can be a bit overwhelming. And just how many things you see in it. And when I was working on the second trailer, I had what looked to be just around as many different characters, different voices and so on, and I thought, I could probably do without some of these. And just throw it in as a quote, which is a bit of text on the screen at certain points. And I didn't want to overwhelm people with so much information that it might end up turning them away from this. If you would like to see the trailer, I can play it right now. Okay. So this second one, again, it's a fair bit different.
It wouldn't be right for us to keep calling you Hank or you forever. It's fine if you don't remember your whole name. We can call you something else for now.
You go with it.
Okay. How about Minnow, since you're small and gentle and sweet?
My dreams aren't about make-believe monsters, usually just things that have happened. And sometimes the path not taken. Things going differently. Most people seem to dream to get away from real life, but to me, it sometimes feels like this is a dream.
Piracy wasn't that huge a problem a couple decades ago. Once Barracuda became a leader, they destabilized their world.
It's hard not to feel like the world is slowing down because the pirates stole everything. And then the resentment is directed at people like me.
Maybe you should save up for food instead of that expensive arm.
I can stare down pirates who want to kill me, but people like her scare me more? What sense does that make?
Those people you're fighting out there didn't hurt the more vulnerable people years ago. Days like this, it's like you're still there, trapped in that time.
I extend a hand to them, offer a way out, and every time I've been completely sincere. Maybe that's what they find so complicated.
She put on this show like she's so forgiving and accepting. I thought she was being genuine. But there's no way someone who fights like her could be that dumb.
No, you don't get it. She isn't sneaky or cunning or any of that. You were beaten by a mental child.
I really don't want to fight you. You're so small and cute, it feels like bullying. I don't know if this has ever crossed your mind, but some of us enjoy being pirates. We aren't slaves.
I'm no slave. Everyone in the Navy tried to stop me from joining, but I was just that determined to make a difference. It's a tricky place to be in, you know? No matter how many times I say I'm doing this because I want to, people will say I don't know any better. Sometimes there's no way to be right.
Do you have any idea how many families live aboard the Queen's flagship? Individuals who have never picked up a gun or sword in their lives? When the Queen is happy, the people are happy.
If I had my way, I'd evacuate every single person from that ship and break it in two. I'd shatter the Queen's empire at the base.
I admire this girl's strength of character. I want her to survive.
Listen now, whatever you do, when someone powerful tells you don't look up, look down, watch out. That's when you want to stink up.
I saw brutes that belonged on a leash, corrupting others' fragile bodies. Weapons best wielded by someone else. So I united them under myself. That's the thing I can't stand about you cyborgs. You're so clumsy. You can't help crushing soft, beautiful things underfoot.
I wasn't born into wealth or with magical DNA. I only got this far by refusing to let life show me. I won't let this Minnow beat me down either. Sheer strength of will stymied by good intentions. That's not how the world works.
I've never minded a crack here or there or a scar. It's just another thing I've made it through. It's proof that I'm still here. Whatever I'm going through now isn't enough to suck me down. It didn't before, and I'll make it through this too.
I made them useful. What else were they going to do with their lives? They were never going to contribute to society in any material way.
I was one of those little things.
There are too many people with attitudes that justify this treatment. It is not humane, it is sick.
When I was adjusting to new lives, Andrea would say it's all right to fall down sometimes. That's all living is, falling forward and catching yourself as many times as you can. Sometimes you stumble, take a step back, but moving forward another step isn't hard. Just let yourself fall again. Just wait for me.
Funny story about that one. I was trying to come up with music that would be fitting for this, and there was this one song that I had listened to maybe hundreds of times since my teen years called Dreamscapes. It was composed by this guy named Hugo Flores, who was part of a band called Sonic Pulsar, which is supposed to be a reference to explosions in space, nebulous forming, that sort of thing. And it was just this indie band of sorts, and they only ever published 2 albums, and only the second one was under like a big record label, and this song wasn't even from that one. And normally you would try to contact these people through their agent, through like the record label, but they never got back to me. And so I was able to track down the original guy himself, this old member of a band that had disbanded in the early 2000s. And he hadn't even posted anything publicly since like 2016. So I thought, he's probably never going to get back to me. But I asked him how much it would cost for a synchronization license, which depending on how popular a band is, can cost you thousands of dollars just to use a song one time in a trailer or some other project. And within a few days, he got back to me and said, it's okay, man, you go ahead. Just be sure to mention me in the credits. Like, how does that even happen? And then, as if that wasn't crazy enough, when I finished the trailer, he wrote to me, and he even posted about it on his page again, the one that he hadn't really updated in years. And he was saying that he was kind of surprised by how well the music fit the story, and how these kinds of stories are like right up his alley. So now he also wants to buy the books. And again, I just have to wonder how this even happens. Because I swear, listening to that song back in my teen years, I never once imagined that the guy who composed that would be looking at my work. And it's just funny how things go. Any other questions before I tackle any other subjects?
Thanks for that story. That was a good story.
Oh, thank you. I I think you just appreciate that I even knew what a synchronization license was, that I didn't even bother to ask, as many people would. Of course, when I uploaded it, YouTube still tried to block the video because they detected the song, and I wrote to them, no, I have written permission from the man himself to feature this, and they thought that was weak. But thankfully, people can still listen to it. It's just a really fickle site. But anyway, I want to say one more thing about the attitudes that people have towards us that I've kind of forgotten to mention until now. I kept this as kid-friendly as I could. No like swearing, no extreme violence, or any racy content like that. I kept it as tame as I could, but still intelligent enough that adults could appreciate it for the social issues that are brought up. Like I don't have them swear like we do nowadays, because even though they do mostly speak English, I'm trying to make it feel like a different world, a different culture. Like they use different words for certain things, like fracking, because that's, they would consider that a terrible action. I do address some of the attitudes that people have regarding us, some of the things that they say about us. Like I have a scene in the first book where behind her back, somebody calls her, I'm just going to say it, they call her a retard, because that's what a lot of people think we are. They don't think there's even anything wrong with saying that. I think it's just the same thing, but they're calling someone autistic is just a nicer way of dressing it up. And I'm trying to call that out and say, no, that's not true. You can't call us that. That's not what we are. And I address some other attitudes that people have towards us, and there are many more that I am still going to tackle as it goes on. But again, I don't want to alienate people with this. That's why I try not to focus too much on the autistic aspect of it, because I don't want people to think that that's the only thing there is to like about this story. Because then it might just feel like a PSA. I wanted it to really have a soul to humanize us and make us easier for other people to understand, not to feel so alien. In other words, I wanted to, yes, normalize it, to make us feel normal. Because what do people think is going to happen? That one day everyone is going to suddenly wake up being this way? No, I just want society to be kinder to those of us who are already here. And we're getting better at diagnosing it all the time. There are so many little signs that people didn't know how to spot before. A little over a century ago, they might have just called you crazy and locked you up somewhere. But now you have people nearing the end of their lives, people in their 80s, who are just realizing that they've had it their entire lives. But it might have been subtle enough that it didn't interfere with that many of their behaviors. Or, again, nobody could really attach a name to it. They just thought, oh, that guy's a little weird sometimes. But that's where we're at. And I hope that as people come to understand it more, that they will be kinder to those of us who, quite simply, are just already having a hard time. So no need to pile on any more to that. And again, I presented it all in a kid-friendly manner. I'd recommend this series for, I guess, mainly 11-year-olds, but I guess 10-year-olds, any younger, and they would need you to maybe explain certain things to them. Like they might not understand what certain words mean or what this character is talking about, and you might just need to explain it to them a little bit. But I try not to make it too difficult to understand. Oftentimes, I've noticed that there would be a scene where I was planning for Minnow to have some big monologue talking about how she's feeling, or even just thinking it to herself in her head, but then I realized her facial expression in that panel was enough to tell the whole story. Or the angle that we see her from, or just the way she's walking tells the entire story in itself. And that's the great thing about a visual medium for this. You don't need some intangible narrator telling you this is what the character's going through. You can just see it from the way their day is going. And I try to make every panel that I can import it in that way. I want every scene to say something. And let's see. One of the clearest examples of that, this is just something that I've learned just in recent years, but I kind of always had a little bit of a sense for it, but it's only fairly recently that I really found out what it's called. Basically, when you want a character to have a clarity of intent of sorts, you keep their eyes fairly simple. This is why some of the most simple cartoon character designs in history have been so successful, so widely remembered by people, is because of a certain level of simplicity. Basically, when someone sees a fictional character, some creature, they might think, okay, that's not me, but it could be, sort of, a little bit. But the more traits you add that that person does not have, like a certain eye color, or a mustache, or some other thing, the more traits you add, the more contradictions you create between the character and the real person. The more hurdles their brain has to jump over, and the more they realize, that's not me, not in any way. And this is basically why characters like Mickey Mouse have been so successful. But even then, you can play around with someone's design from scene to scene. Like here, you see, I try to make her eyes look very simple. You know, just this big, murky pupil, just because it's easier to see, kind of what she's going through. I found that when you want to make a character look very focused, that look can help. Like here, going back to this image, you can see there's nothing, like no deception there. There are no extra layers to have to break through. You can tell like how she's feeling right now. There's nothing in the way. There's, again, that clarity of intent. Whereas in something like this cover, you may have noticed a little more detail. I added a clear separation between the pupil and the iris, and even a little white dot. Adding more details like that can make a character a little more conflicted, more uncertain. They're still figuring things out. It's just one of those tricks you pick up and can make the most of. Like I remember this one series. I'm having trouble remembering what it was called, but I remember at the time that it was released, it was panned at first by critics because the art style is fairly simple, and they would say, oh, this looks like it was drawn by a kindergartner. It looks so unprofessional. But before long, other people started to see the beauty in it because they could see how intentional it all was and how the artist just had to change one tiny little detail, like the angle of someone's eyebrow, and bam, they're suddenly conveying a completely different emotion. They may have looked very happy one moment, but you change one tiny little thing, it looks almost like a different person. It's just, doing things that meticulously. Like when you talk about trying not to have too much detail, it can create an impression of laziness. I'm just trying to be efficient. I'm just trying to make the clearest possible vision that I can. Not have anything distracting people from what I want to say, what I want to convey with it. This is one of my favorite images. It's actually a mishmash of a couple of different ones. I wanted to make use of that background of the ocean with tiny Minnow herself and near the top just starting back down. The other image in it is this one here. I was trying to make a statement with this one that her parts, her limbs, they're temporary. They can break very easily, but she manages to endure. I was trying to make them look so corroded, so old and rusty, that all it takes is a strong breeze to just whisk them away, completely demolish them. But she is still there. Like even here on this cover, I want to make an impression right away where you see her hooked up to something, probably transfusing some kind of medicine to help her body not reject, the pieces, not get any infections. And this is just a fairly routine thing for her. But you can also see, with her other hand, her other prosthetic hand, she's petting her sea dog, and he doesn't mind. He doesn't see the difference. So, before I go, wow, I've been going for about an hour now. Before I say anything else, does anyone else have anything they want to say? Yes.
I have a comment and a question. I just wanted to make a comment about this whole labeling of every part of a person's personality or conditions or whatever. But that is that's the modern world. Because in my day, when we were in elementary school and middle school and high school, we had some kids that were just kind of weird, kind of quirky, and we recognized that, and that was them, and we liked them or didn't like them for what they were, and how what kind of how they enhanced our lives or didn't, whatever. It was very, And now this labeling is so dehumanizing. When I think back to some of the kids in my class that I thought were just a little off, a little odd, but I still think of them as human, not, a label.
That is the flip side of it. Like, some people will tell you that they always knew something was off with them, but they just didn't know what. They would just have people get frustrated with them for not understanding certain things, like, why are you so weird all the time?
Mm-hmm.
It's like introverts. Like extroverts are very outgoing. They tend to like draw from other people through social interactions. That's why they kind of seek it out, why they might crave it. Whereas introverts, it's not like that for us. And yes, I am kind of an introvert. Big social interactions, it's like we're giving a piece of ourselves away. It can be very draining, and we kind of have to recuperate from that. But going back to labels, it is nice that we do have something of a name for it now. Like I've heard from more than a few people that they were so relieved when they found out it was that and not something maybe worse. Finding like, oh, thank goodness I'm not a sociopath or something like that.
Well,
yeah.
I suppose it just seems to me that we're all a little bit weird in our own way.
Yes.
And
Well,
so,
that is the flip side of it, is that some people use it as a crutch and make it harder for those of us who are trying to improve and adjust to it. Like back around the beginning of this decade, we'll say 2009 to 2011, things got bad, like on the internet especially. Because you would have certain people, like certain individuals going online, making videos and making a fool of themselves. And when people called them out for their creepy behavior, they would say, oh, well, I can't help acting this way. I'm autistic. That's why I'm the way I am. And I'd look at those people and think, no, they have some other things going on.
Yeah.
But, when they blame it all on their autism, it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's like, oh, I don't have to improve myself in any way because I'm always going to be like this. Why even try? Everyone else should just, accommodate me. And I couldn't see myself in that kind of existence. I look at that, like blaming all my problems on that, and it would just be depressing. I would not have progressed as much as I have. Like just striving to improve yourself is a part of any basic human existence, but that's never to say that someone should outright reject a part of themselves. Just, again, you gotta learn to live with it. Play nice with it. Maybe a little month, I don't know exactly what to call it. But because of individuals like that, who would blame all of their tendencies on something like that, it gave the rest of us a bad reputation. Where people would like flip it around, and then if they found out that you were autistic too, they would dogpile you. They would try to chase you off the internet for being just like those guys. And thankfully, over the years, that has simmered down a little bit. It's not quite as bad now, though that rhetoric is still there. There are more people who are accepting of us than there were about a decade ago. But that kind of bowl is one of the reasons that I made this. It was almost like defending myself in a way. Like going like, no, you don't know me, you don't know us, here. This is one of the reasons many authors do this, is to make some kind of a statement. This is kind of an out there example, but Victor Hugo, the guy who wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, he wrote that book because the already 600-year-old structure was falling apart. It was becoming a skeleton, and the people of France just didn't really care, and they didn't really notice it. But he wrote that story, and pretty much overnight, people fell in love with the structure again and saw it as this symbol of France and of humanity in general, and they rebuilt it. They patched it up, and then and even now, it's still standing. People were really worried for a while there, a couple decades ago, but it's still there like it was then, and we fixed it up before we can do it again. But you see, that was Victor Hugo making this outcry, something that he was thinking, and he wanted to other people to understand. And I think that's really the best reason for any writer to put a message out there, to see if it doesn't only matter to them, to see how it resonates with other people. And I think you get the idea by now that that's one of the reasons that I made this was because I felt it was necessary. But again, I didn't want it to just be like, hey, here's an autistic character, accept it, and leave it at that. Again, you do kind of have to build up a world for them to fit in, for them to interact with and bounce off of, and you see how a person like that would cope there, and how it might change them or they might be able to change it. So, I'm probably going to wrap up fairly soon, but does anyone else have any questions? Yes?
I do. Comment and question. This has been most interesting to listen to. And I've worked with people with disabilities, children, for the last 50 years, so giving things a name is important because it helps you understand pieces of what's happening in a person's behavior. Not just the behavior, it's what's behind it, how it can change, the impact the environment has, whatever else. But I'm going to assume you had an incredible amount of support from friends and family, understanding you and seeing you as a whole person. And how important that is, how so important that is for anybody living with disabilities or working with them or whatever. And I commend you for coming forward. I just can't even say it strong enough, for coming forward and making your point. It's just so important.
Well, thank you. Yes, I did have people in my life, thankfully, who were always there for me, who always believed in me. But there were always those who, again, probably didn't think it was practical, who, they meant well. They didn't want me to end up destitute myself or something like that, and they probably thought that that's where this would wind me up. They might not have understood comics that well themselves and probably just didn't see it taking off. But as, it is starting to, like, it's just a couple of years since I first released it, you can bet they're supportive now. Because they see that this is the best thing for me, that it does help me. Whereas before, they, like I said, they always wanted the best for me. It's just that some had a different idea because, again, they might not have understood comics. But I did thankfully always have those who were there for me, who believed in me right away. And I just hope it didn't take too long to get here, basically. But, I just turned 28, so, some people don't get their first book published until their 40s or 50s. So I guess I'm doing okay. I'm already working on volume 5. One other thing, this is something that I kept forgetting earlier. I guess this is the last major subject that I'll tackle, is, this keeps happening. Like, something will pop into my head and I'll take a few seconds too long. Let me see, even though I'm making a point. I know I was right on it. I'm sorry, I might just need a moment because it's, oh wait, I think I said Oh yes, I brought up scapegoating earlier. It's something that I see so much, is a divided and fearful populace is an easy to control populace. The thing is, when people can sense there's something wrong with society, they have those like vengeful feelings, they want to direct at something, to be able to point it at somebody. And what is this huge system, this interconnected thing with all these layers and all these different faces, that could be terrifying for a person who's like, well, where do I start? How do I change the world? It's much easier to have just, like the one group that you can target, to be able to point them and say, aha, they're the ones responsible for all our problems. If we just get rid of them, everything will turn out great. As if it's something in the movie. It's like, no, that the world isn't that simple of a place. But people will be pitted against each other, against their own neighbors, and that's why I have Andrea, Minnow's caretaker, say, when someone powerful tells you don't look up, look down, as in don't look at what we're doing, or we're the ones like actually messing up your society. No, just focus on each other. Just attack each other and be distracted that way. And we see this in as early as the first book. Minnow through just a bad situation. She isn't able to respond like the right way or quickly enough. So in that first scene, Andrea, her mother figure at the time who adopted her, dies. And then we cut to several years later, and you see how Minnow's fallen in hard times, and how people blame her for that. Because the thing is, Andrea used to be the captain of that ship. She retired a few years before this happened to focus on raising Minnow, who was still like just a teenager at the time. And they all had this fantasy that she would go back to being captain someday, that she would come back to her senses. And this, they don't like the current captain. They wish they could go back to that. But instead of taking up their issues with him, they go after her because she's an easy target, because she's right there, she can't really fight back much. It's perfect, a perfect little stress ball, basically. And you can't treat people that way, especially not like the most vulnerable people of all. So, that's how it starts, but then it starts to get bigger, and we start to see like more groups of people affected this way, targeted this way, and Minnow comes to realize how there are always going to be certain giants in the world, and people might feel hopeless. Like, what am I supposed to do about that? How can I beat that? And that's why often an easier target will be provided for them. Like, oh yeah, now I can still get the satisfaction of toppling somebody, and I can at least live with that. And I'm just telling people not to give in to that tendency. It's one of the worst things about people, I think, and it's such an easy behavior to sink into. And basically, the villains of this story, the people who hired the pirates, they like to put certain people down, because in their minds, humanity is only really happy and fulfilled when they have an enemy. And if they don't have some enemy to fight, to direct all of their nasty impulses at, then they won't be as happy. And Minnow is, of course, completely opposed to that idea. She thinks that we're at our best when we pull each other up. Instead of kicking other people down to climb up to a certain place, instead of crossing a bridge and then burning it behind you so that nobody else can ever cross it, that you should help other people across. Maybe people who can't, make it all that way on their own. And then we can uplift each other and be better than that. Basically, it's just the villains of the story. They're very cynical people, and they don't see the basic goodness in humanity, and Minnow does, because all this evil is just banal, it's unnecessary. And again, that's basically the moral center of this. It's like certain characters, some of the pirates, they see how Minnow acts, they see how sincere and upfront she is, and they don't buy it. They think, no, nobody's that wishy-washy. No, she must be this cunning mastermind who's just pretending to be this nice. And when they find out that no, it's not an act, she really is like this, they really were outwitted by someone that they would call childish, it completely shatters their worldview. Like, some of them just can't cope with it and would lash out at her even more. And the funny thing is, when I was writing this, I've seen other people on the receiving end of it. I never faced it myself, but as I was getting ready to release this, someone came at me, that way, thinking that the way I act isn't how I really am, that I surely must be much nastier on the inside, just like them, I guess. Hey, that's just how everyone is, right? And again, I'm trying to say, no, dare to be hopeful, dare to, believe in things, to be sincere. You're not stupid for that, whether you're artistic or not. So, that's my story, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I guess before I wrap this up, I'll just ask one more time, with everything that I've addressed in mind, are there any other questions? Oh, yes.
I'm amazed by your works and stories you tell. Even today, I'm going through a lot of struggles many people. Okay, well, I also have autism, and currently it's family life that's really drawing me for a loop. So, just wanted to ask you, what was family life like for you?
Well,
it's not too grown up a subject.
it is kind of a hard question to be asked for like anybody, but my childhood was good. It's just that some things came harder to me than they would to other people. There were things that I just didn't understand, and I needed to be. It's like, I'm going to go back to my brother. I've heard it like described it sometimes as like being almost like a flower that just doesn't want to bloom, like it's scared of the light. It just needs to gently be coaxed out of that. And like once I heard of that allegory from a very early age, it's like then I understood. And just little things like that, she helped me understand that I'm not stupid. I just need a little extra help with some things that might come more naturally to other people, but they might not need explained to them. And I come to understand those things better, but again, it cannot be understated enough just how, under different circumstances, I might have felt like I was on my own, but thankfully I wasn't. Though I do get overloaded sometimes, just by basic things. Just, again, going out to big social gatherings and so on. I'll be having fun at the time, I'll put on a brave face and seem outgoing, but afterwards I'll need to just go to my room for a while and just listen to music and just try to forget everything for a little bit, to unpack, essentially. And I have a few scenes where Minnow does that, where someone might go like, hey, you went through a lot today, do you want to talk about it? Because that's the normal thing that you do. That's supposed to help people, to let them vent about it. But in her case, she's like, no, I just need to be alone for a little while to process this on my own. Because she already has all of her own thoughts bouncing around the inside of her head, inside of her skull. She doesn't need like someone else's right away. But again, we do come out of it. It just might take longer than for other people. And we just need people to be willing to, wait for us. So, I know there was a really long roundabout answer that probably wasn't too clear, but yes, I did have the childhood I needed. So, anything else before I wrap this up? All right, then. I guess we're done here for today. Thank you all for listening. Again, I just want to tell a very different sort of story than so many I've seen, and I hope that it resonates with people. Again, not just those who are disabled, not just those who know somebody with something like autism, but that people in general can enjoy, of all ages, of all groups. And, you can find a couple copies of these right here at the library, assuming they haven't already been taken.
One set already walked. Remember, I
Oh,
told you that, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
They just couldn't wait. Well, I am willing to sign these copies if anyone wants them here today. And there are business cards to the website, some pins if anyone wants them, and I guess that's it. So, sorry, there is one very last thing. This is what's been gnawing at my head the whole time. All those times I was forgetting what I want to say next. The reason I called it this, Planet Ripple, and the reason I called her Minnow, is I was trying to convey firstly that it's nothing like the world we have today. It is Earth, but it's such a different Earth they don't even call it that anymore. It wouldn't make sense to with how there hasn't been a land in so long, even though it is coming back. But I was trying to make a statement that every person who exists, every person who touches the surface, they leave their mark. Sure, it's gone after a few seconds. We can't see it anymore, but it's like the ocean remembers. It is still proof that they were there at a time. They did exist. They do still matter, even someone as small and gentle as, a minnow. And that's how that name worked out perfectly for her. I was just trying to think of some kind of fish name, because I'd already decided to call the Pirate Queen from Barracuda to show how big and nasty she is. And I was at our family getaway, down at the coast, and I saw a school of minnows going by, and I thought, oh, that's perfect. So here we are. And that's everything that I wanted to say. That's the meaning of the title and the character. So thank you again for listening.
Nicholas said he has books here for sale. His artwork that's in the stairwell gallery is also for sale.
They're all signed.
And thank you so much for coming. Want to say hi to Nicholas?